The average gas price is above $4 in every state here in the United States. Who's to blame for the pain at the pump? President Biden is quick to point the finger at Putin and the conflict in Ukraine. But might the blame lie closer to home? Joining me for analysis on this and much more, national security and foreign policy expert for Newsmax TV, Walid Phares. Walid, thanks for being here. Last week, the Biden administration canceled drilling sales in Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico at a time when gas prices are skyrocketing. The administration's trying quickly to find an alternative to Russian oil. And as you know, the U.S. reduced its reliance on foreign supplies, and it's pushing for green energy. Now, President Biden's attempts to lobby the UAE and Saudi Arabia to increase oil production produce nothing. Why are they so cold to Biden's overtures? They won't even take his call, Walid.
What a question, Raymond, and that would allow us and allow your viewers to understand that whatever our policy was for a year and a half under this administration, these are now the results coming back to haunt us. You mentioned Saudi Arabia, the UAE, I would add other countries in the region, meaning the Arab coalition or the members of the Abraham Accord. They were not happy over the past year and a half, at least, because of what? Because of the Iran deal. So in the Biden administration, rushes so fast to go back to an Iran deal that is going to threaten them. They were not included in the negotiation. So wasn't Israel as well. What do you expect them to do? So that's why we need to, first of all, make sure that we're not going back to the Iran deal, at least at this point in time, to coordinate with our allies on the ground, that's Israel and the Arab coalition and other forces in the Middle East. And at the same time, we need to get our energy here, at least part of it, so we could balance the loss of Russian oil and gas.
Yeah. Vice President Kamala Harris led a high-powered American delegation to the United Arab Emirates on Monday to pay respects to the Federation's late leader and meet the newly ascended president. Now, she was there, Walid, for a grand total of 3 hours. Did the VP's trip help repair the troubled, frayed relations with the UAE? And what should the administration be doing?
Look, I mean, relations between governments and nations are not done by 3 hours. The only 3 hours that changed policy in the Middle East was when President Sadat, the late President Sadat, traveled to Jerusalem and delivered a speech at the Knesset. He opened an era of peace between Israel and some of the Arab countries. The vice president going, that's a good thing. But before that, there need to be signals being sent by Washington, D.C. And as I said earlier, first of all, that we're not going to throw Israel and the Arab coalition under the bus because of the Iran deal, that we're not going to remove the Iran Revolutionary Guard, those who are actually firing missiles on the Arabian countries and Israel. We're not going to remove them from the terror list. But also, there is the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood. There's the issue of leaving Afghanistan to the Taliban. I mean, there need to be a change or a signal, at least. The president should deliver a speech and say, we are now reconsidering our previous policies. That would be as important, maybe more important, than the actual physical visit to the UAE or any other country in the Middle East.
You referenced the Iran nuclear deal, which is something Biden has been committed to since the Obama years. But the talks have stalled now, because Iran is demanding that Washington lift the terrorist designation of the country's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard. The deal almost came to an agreement, but then Russia demanded that trading with Iran be exempted from the Western sanctions over the Ukraine war. You believe Iran is winning here. Why?
I do believe Iran is winning because Iran is in the center of a position whereby the administration is having to make choices. I mean, we cannot fight everybody at the same time. We are fully engaged in this issue of Ukraine. We are engaged also in containing China. North Korea is moving in all directions. So where do we send all our task forces and all our energy? In addition to the fact, Raymond, and we discussed it, you and I, Afghanistan is not right yet because Taliban are bringing back Al-Qaeda. So in this whole complex situation, to rush back and sign the Iran deal. I mean, let's take 1 year. Let's wait after the midterm elections. Because if we want energy from the Middle East, we cannot sign the deal and get that energy from the Middle East at this point in time.
Wow. At a press briefing this week, the State Department said this about the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that also known as the Iran nuclear deal. Listen.
At this point, a deal remains far from certain. Iran needs to decide, as I alluded to before, whether it insists on conditions that are extraneous to the JCPOA or whether it is ready, willing, and able to conclude the JCPOA, a mutual return to compliance with it, quickly. We know that it would serve America's national security interests. We believe that it in turn would serve all sides' interests.
Walid, would it serve all sides' interest if that Iran nuclear deal is signed?
You know, the problem is that the JCPOA that was designed in 2015, the circumstances have changed in the region. Iran is all over the Middle East. It controlled 4 Arab countries. There was no Ukraine war. We have a Ukraine war. Trying to remove the Iranian revolutionary guard from the terror list means that you're going to give them a lot of money. And it's going to allow Iran to buy more ICBMs, ballistic missiles. On top of it, just last week, as we can see it now on TV screens, there are a lot of demonstrations inside Iran. So this pressure group that is putting pressure on the Biden administration to go ahead and sign because of these contracts need to be patient. Because if we sign the agreement now, we may bring conditions that would be worse than any agreement that we're signing now in the next few years. Just patience should be the title.
Well, I also am concerned about the fragile peace that was negotiated with the Abrahamic Accords, where you have relative peace in the Middle East because you've got that bloc of Arab countries opposed to Iran. It keeps everybody in check and brings Israel into the family there. Now all of that is up for grabs again, it seems to me at least.
It is. I mean, just look at the slogans. The Abraham Accord is about peace between UAE, Bahrain, all the other Arab countries. It's bringing the Saudis soon. So if you want oil and the Saudis are coming in, that's where you should be going. While Iran is not, as the State Department official just said right now, is not accepting the conditions, is buying more weapons, is firing missiles against the UAE and Saudi Arabia. On top of that, is not even signing the minimum that the Biden administration wants. So if I am the Biden administration, I would dare giving an advice here. I would fully commit to the Abraham Accord, fully commit to the support of the Arab coalition, and then tell the Iranians, when you decide to come to my condition as America, then I'll discuss matters with you.
Yeah. In the meantime, we have alienated allies and now deepened our energy woes here in America because the Saudis could have helped us out by increasing oil production. They're sitting on their hands in the meantime. Moving on to the latest news from the Russian-Ukraine war. This week, Finland and Sweden applied to join NATO despite Turkey's objection. Jake Sullivan, White House National Security Advisor, said this.
This is a historic event, a watershed moment in European security. 2 nations with a long tradition of neutrality will be joining the world's most powerful defensive alliance, and they will bring with them strong capabilities and a proven track record as security partners.
The Finns leader is in the United States this week, meeting with congressional leaders as well as the president. How could Russia respond if Finland and Sweden join NATO?
Well, by extending their war in Ukraine, because what the international community wants, what the United States, European Union really want, is for Moscow to stop the operation and negotiations to start. So Russia or Putin could continue that confrontation, could extend it, probably not to Finland and Sweden, but to Moldavia, where one slice of that country is already under Russian militias or Russian troops. And also remember that Russia is an ally with China. If you look at Asia, Raymond, 2/3 of China, or 2/3 of Asia rather, have now got under a different axis, which is very hostile to the United States, and add Iran on top of that. So it's a good thing to have Finland and to have Sweden, and eventually later part of Ukraine to become part of the of NATO. But the timing is always the most important, and we need to be committed. We can't have them come in, and if Russia starts to pound them with pressure, just let them go. That's important.
Yeah. Well, it would seem to me if you let Finland and Sweden into NATO, then everybody's got to get involved in this war. And that doesn't mean just sending billions of dollars or weapons. It means sending our troops in. And that's a dangerous trade-off, I think. Putin's goal to invade Ukraine was allegedly to demilitarize, in his words, and to denazify Ukraine, as well as preventing Ukraine from joining the Western Defensive Alliance, NATO. Does Ukraine now have a chance to join NATO with Finland and Sweden on a fast track? And what happens to Ukraine?
Not immediately, Raymond, because that would be dangerous. That would be if Ukraine is now accepted as is during a war with Russia in NATO, and I know that Brussels and Washington understand that. It means Ukraine is at war, then NATO will have to, move on Article 5 and immediately join Ukraine against Russia. This is something that even this administration understood that we can't do. What needs to be done is, first of all, ceasefire. Let them negotiate on the Crimea, on the east, on the rest. Maybe accept Ukraine as part of the European Union because that is economic. NATO would be too dangerous to have Ukraine going into that organization at this point in time immediately.
Ukrainian forces are on the counter-offensive to regain non-ethnic Russian territories currently in Russian hands. If fully successful, the Ukrainian army will reach the Russian red lines. The question is, what happens next, Walid?
I am very pragmatic because I'm a student of history. I wrote many books on history, as you know. Yes, Ukrainians can take back the areas where Russian troops are not going to fight to the end because this is not Russian land. That we understand. So all these counterattacks by the Ukrainians will get to Ukrainian ethnic areas and bring them back to Ukraine. Where I don't think this is going to be the case is when the Ukrainian troops get to ethnic Russian areas like the east or like the south, or of course the areas inhabited by Russians themselves. So at one point, what we're going to see is a ceasefire, a de facto situation between an eastern Ukraine controlled by Russia and the rest of Ukraine, which will be Western. And then the skills of negotiations need to show us how they can make this possible, peace possible.
Wow. The Senate voted this week a new $40 billion aid package for Ukraine. It could be on Biden's desk by the end of the week. Offering money to Ukraine is certainly better than military troop involvement. However, Americans are struggling with the highest inflation in 40 years, Walid. How should we be helping Ukraine? And isn't this just a big payout to military contractors who are trading out our old weapon systems and now leaving America with nothing, so you have to replenish the stockpile?
From an American national self-interest, it's really a question that American experts in finances and economics needs to answer, and the American public, citizens. I mean, how much money do we need to offer, not just in terms of Ukraine, who are fighting the Russians, but any other ally in the world. If we just are here to fund everybody who's fighting everybody else, we will have a financial problem here. We are committed to the Ukrainians, meaning we are committed into the defense of Ukraine. That I think we are doing, and Europeans should help us with. I don't know if we are committed to help the Ukrainian government go all the way to the borders and counterattack into Russia. So we have to strike a balance between the two. Defense, yes. Offensive, they need to coordinate with us. Ukrainians need to coordinate with NATO and with the United States.
Good point. President Biden just left on an Asian tour. He's going to be there all throughout the weekend into next week. You believe that there's a Russia, China, North Korea axis forming. I want to put up a map. You tweeted this out recently. Theoretically, the new axis could create a defensive maritime front in the Western Pacific. What threats could emerge here, Walid?
Raymond, from reading the map, as simple as that, and I did it with a number of experts, that line starts in the North Pole. We are facing facing off with the Russians at the North Pole. And that now starts in Norway all the way down to Alaska. And that line goes down into North Korea. And then, of course, facing Japan all the way to subtropical Philippines and beyond. And let me remind our viewers that China, meanwhile, over the past 2 months, landed its forces, or at least its presence, in the Solomon Islands that is facing Australia. So I would be very cautious in terms of generalizing the confrontation across Asia. We are not ready. We cannot confront all these threats at the same time. I mean, China and Russia, North Korea, of course, and then you can't forget that Iran is also a problem in the Middle East. We need to be very smart, do priority. which is our priority right now, and then address it.
At a Senate hearing this month, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines was asked if Beijing thinks it has a window of opportunity to invade Taiwan. Listen.
It's our view that they are working hard to effectively put themselves into a position in which their military is capable of taking Taiwan over our intervention, right? We can talk in closed sessions about timelines and so on for how quickly they think they may be able to achieve that.
What is the state of China's plan to invade Taiwan? Are they ready? Are they prepared to go?
Look, we have impressive intelligence community and agencies who collect a lot of information, listen to what all sides are saying, but the analysis at the end of the day is done by one brain at the very end. And so my assessment is that the Chinese right now, if we look at the whole capability of China, China today is not China of the 50s and the 60s, this Mao Zedong constant invasion. China is very capitalist. They have financial economic interests on all continents, including in the Americas and in Africa. So they understand if they want that flow of money, and by the way, they have our debts, by the way, they need not to shock us. So a pure invasion overnight of Taiwan, maybe the Chinese can pull it, but then they will lose all their economic might, and that's a big loss for their middle class. Rather, what I think the Chinese are doing, they're putting pressure on Taiwan, and at the same time, the stick and the carrot, and telling the Taiwanese, why don't you join us? But the real advance by China is not Taiwan at this point in time. It's the Pacific Ocean. I mean, they are buying elites in Solomon Islands and many other nations, and that would be the movement I would be very concerned about.
What's going on at the southern U.S. border is something getting very little attention. Texas is set to partner with the Mexican military in one of the Mexican states to jointly secure the border. Does this even matter, given that the administration's expected to lift Title 42, the health care turnback provision? We could have as many as 18,000 illegal immigrants a day coming across the border, Walid.
It is a race, Raymond, as you know, and you and I discussed it many times, between what the federal government or the administration is trying to open and what now local states, including Texas and others, are trying to address. 2016, at the end of 2016, early 2017, we discussed, you and I, that Mexico and the United States, it became the Trump administration, put together, the two federal governments, find a solution, and they did. The Mexicans deployed up to 27,000 troops, and it was moving forward in that direction. Plus, of course, you have the wall. Now, because Washington is not willing to take action, Texas is coordinating, or parts of Texas are coordinating with the other side, the Mexican local authority. And Mexicans and Americans on the Rio Grande can do much better than the federal sides on both Mexico and Washington. So maybe this could be a solution. Wow. I'm not sure about the other states, not sure about California, for example.
Yeah, I'm also not sure about the federal statutes. I bet they're going to run afoul of federal statutes that protect the border and reserve that for federal oversight. They can protect inland, but not the border itself. So we'll see what happens there. Walid Phares, thank you for being here. You can follow Dr. Walid Phares at Walid Phares on Twitter.